of applause for Rotimi Sankore as he gives a welcome remarks.
Thank you, Ahoba. I will say a little bit about what we do, and then in terms of the scene setting, also explain why it's important that we're here today. Why it's really important that we're here today, because population and data has not really been in the mix of national discourse in Nigeria since democracy returned to the country in 1999. Before then, it was military rule, and those issues just never came up at all. By way of scene setting, I'd like us to go through some data sets that can help us understand where we are today, why we are here today. Now, this is something that should be taught in primary and secondary school so that everyone has a sense of scale. Our population trajectory since 1960, as you can see, 45 million in 1960. And as you go up decade by decade, you can see how the population has grown. Has the investment in human development kept up with this? The obvious and self-evident answer is no. So, 1960 to 2020, then look at 2022 to 2050, what the projections are. 216 million today, estimated. By 2050, 401 million. In other words, by 2050, the population will roughly double. And that's a lot. About 200 million more. Please pay attention to the second slide. So I always say to people, the main threat to Nigeria is underdevelopment. Compare with France. In 1960, the population of Nigeria was the same as France. By 2000, the population of France had gone up by 20 million. In that same period, the population of Nigeria had gone up by 161 million. 20 million, 161 million. Can see where the problem is starting. Because the investment in education, electricity, health has not kept up with population growth. So you have to ask, what did we think was going to happen? There is a reason why the developed countries are more developed, and there is a reason why the underdeveloped countries are more underdeveloped. One of them is poor investment in human capacity relative to population growth. In September, something happened which in most countries would be regarded as a national tragedy. The UNESCO Institute of Statistics released new estimates for out-of-school children globally. 20 million in Nigeria. 20 million out-of-school kids between the ages of 6 and 16 years old. For context, these are countries that are 20 million and under. Côte d'Ivoire, 20 million. Niger Republic, our neighbor, 17. Chile, 17 million. Netherlands, 16 million. Cuba, 11 million. Belgium, 11 million. Sweden, 9 million. So our out-of-school population is now more than that of about 90 countries in the world. It's going to lead to serious instability going forward, and I'll demonstrate why. This is figure from the Bureau of Statistics. It gives you an idea, the connection between education, lack of access to education, instability, fragility, and insecurity. and demonstrate that the solution is not an exclusively military one. It cannot be. So, population that cannot read at all by zones: Northwest 40%, Northeast 49%, North Central 26%, Southwest 10%, South 11%, Southeast 13%. So you can see, once it hits 25% and up, the instability starts to creep in, because you have larger numbers of people that cannot read, cannot write, cannot get jobs. The fragility kicks in. Now, this is for males. Unfortunately, gender is always an issue. This is for females. You can see population that cannot read at all: Northwest 70%, Northeast 68%, North Central 50%, Southwest 19%, Southeast 20%, South 20%. Why is this important? It is actually very, very important, because if you have a larger population of girls and women that cannot read at all, then they are far more open to exploitation, high fertility rates, poverty, and so forth. One thing I always say to people is, if you look at the countries at the top of the Global Human Development Index, there is one thing all of them have in common. It's gender equality. When you take everything else into account, it's gender equality. The higher proportion of girls and women have gone to school, participation in labor force, income, and so forth. So, the higher this number is, the more fragile the country is. People don't pay attention to it. They think it doesn't matter. They think oil or gas or things like that are the key issues. No. Equality is really important, and gender equality is one of those equalities that we really need to pay attention to. If you look at secondary school completion, this is for males. You start to see the connections with fragility, instability, insecurity. The data is really important. You can see the Northwest, 19% of males have completed secondary school. In the Northeast, it's 18%. In North Central, it's 30%. For Southwest, Southeast, and South-South, it's above 40%. But none of the 6 zones has over 50% of males that have completed secondary school. None. So you can see that while those that have lower rates of secondary school completion are more unstable, more fragile, more insecure, the rest of the country is not really far behind. So, secondary school completion by state, and this is official data from the NBS. There are only 4 states in Nigeria where more than 50% of males have completed secondary school. 4 states in Nigeria. It tells you a lot about the prospects of the country going forward. For females, there is no state in Nigeria where up to 50% of females have completed secondary school. The investment in human development is abysmal. Now, please note, a lot of these problems are coming from the sub-national level, from the states. In the Northeast, Northwest, and North Central, it is not because the people don't want to go to school. It is because the schools have not been built. It is really, really important for us to note this, because there are a lot of stereotypes going around. They don't want to go to school. They don't want to go to school. No. A lot of those states are in near feudalism. The investment is not being made. Now, if you dive down to the state level, it gives you an idea. Katsina has been in the news a lot for banditry. A deep dive gives you an idea why this is so. We can't do this for all the 36 states, but this gives you an idea. Now, all these figures are from the Bureau of Statistics, from the DHS, and from the mix. Highest malnutrition and stunting in the country is in Katsina, 58%. The impact of this, you can't quantify it. Cognitive ability, intellectual ability, growth, all kinds of problems, 58%. First child marriage, 70%. Highest births per woman, 7.3%. Lowest age of sexual initiation for girls, 15 years. Highest polygamy rate, 50%. 7 to 32 children per man. 7 to 32 children per man. Out of school children, just under 1 million. The biggest average class size in Nigeria, 101 per class. That's the average class size. This is a deep dive into some of the states, Katsina, Zamfara, Yobe, and so forth. This summarizes for you. Look, if this wasn't in Nigeria, if you take any state, any country in the world, and show the same data, you can conclude immediately that that state, that country is going to be fragile, unstable, prone to insecurity. These are things that the media really has to pay attention to because it helps explain a lot of the things that are happening in the country. Another summary deep dive into Zamfara. No access to education for males, 60%. No access to education for females, 75%. Cannot read and write, males, 60%. Cannot read and write, females, 77%. Completed secondary school, male, 16%. Completed secondary school, female, 9.8%. Why did we zero in on these two states? Because of the rising banditry in those states. We need to be able to explain why are the bandits able to recruit in such large numbers. We have to be able to explain it. Because if we don't reduce the numbers available for them to recruit, then they will keep growing. And as they grow, they destabilize the surrounding states, they destabilize the entire country. There is no amount of Tucano planes, helicopter combat, that can solve this problem. It's just not going to happen. We can see bandits now as young as 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. The AK-47s are bigger than them, the really young ones. So, back to gender. If you look at the fertility rates around the country, you will see the states with the highest fertility rates in the country are more prone to fragility, instability, insecurity. Zamfara, Kebbi, Katsina, Kano, Jigawa, and so forth, Borno, Yobe. Once it hits 5 children per woman, and you multiply by polygamy, and the investment is not made in education and all the other indicators of human development, the fragility, the instability, the insecurity starts to set in. So this is really important, especially for the state governments, to understand that policy and investment for gender equality is crucial to stability, economic growth, in fact, the entire future of the country. Now, one of the things driving this is forced child marriage. People think things like this don't matter. People think things like this don't matter. Oh, it's their tradition. Oh, it's just girls. No, it matters. It's really crucial. Look at forced child marriage before the age of 18. Northwest 67%, Northeast 56%, North Central 39%, Southwest 14%, South 21%, Southeast 13%. We can see the trend. It's really, really crucial. Investment in girl child education is crucial to the future of every country. Nigeria cannot be an exception at all. If you break it down state by state, then you start to see how the pattern: Sokoto 68%, Zamfara 71%, Katsina 70%, Kano 69%, and so forth. Now, people like to think that things like this don't happen in Lagos. But note that in Lagos, first child marriage is 8%, and the population of Lagos is 20 million. 20 million. So 8%, if you look at the population of girls and women relative to, say, 10 million, the absolute number of that is much higher than in some of the northern states. If we go back to the question of out-of-school children, the Lagos State Basic Education Board has told us 2 million children in Lagos out of school. 2 million children. That's higher than in Katsina. The reason we don't have the level of banditry in Lagos is because it's the commercial capital. The kids are absorbed into child labor. The representative of the ILO will talk more about this. Child labor, bricklaying, street begging, all kinds of things, bus conductor, apprentices. So they are not drawn into banditry as they would be if they were in the rural area. 2 million kids out of school in Lagos. 90% of the primary schools in Lagos are privately owned. 90%. This figures from the Federal Ministry of Education. If the private operators decide that it's no longer profitable for them to run primary schools, what happens? What happens in Lagos? Urban gangs. It's really crucial. I predict that if the trend goes on, in 10 years, there are parts of Lagos you can't go to without protection. I guarantee you that. The kids will just take over all the local government. There's an urban gang in Lagos called 1 Million Boys. They are not 1 million yet, but they can see where it is going, and they've named themselves appropriately. They've won the cap. An urban youth gang in Lagos, 1 Million Boys. That's what they call themselves. So, I want to talk briefly about gender polygamy, first child marriage, so people understand the context a bit more. They think that it's culture or religion is not quite appropriate. Even in Saudi Arabia, the custodian of Sunni Islam, the age of marriage for girls has been raised to 18. And there are countries where this was legislated against a long time ago. In Turkey in 1926, in Tunisia in 1963. And it's not just Muslims. We know that in the southern part of the country, a lot of men engage in this practice as well. In Bayelsa, up until recently, first child marriage was 50%. 1 or 2 girls. So it's not just a northern or Muslim phenomenon. But this is what happens, just to be able to explain the impact. So it's one guy, 3 or 4 girls or women, and 6, 7, 8 children each. Now, what happens apart from the obvious here in terms of reducing girls' participation in education, increasing total fertility rates, contributing to high maternal and child mortality, food insecurity, poor nutrition, poverty, fragile communities, which can be exploited by extremism, bandits. one of the things that happens is, and we really have to explain this very well, as there are fewer girls available to interact with males of their age, what happens is that men start to look at younger girls. If all the girls 15, 16, 17, 18 have been captured by older men, the men start to look towards 12, 13, 11, 10, and so forth. And the problem starts to deepen. The girls are robbed of their education, their futures. The country starts to get more fragile. It's mass human rights violation. Mass. It's really important that we understand this, because the policymakers don't really talk about it. They don't talk about the implications for it. Now, let's talk about malnutrition. This is one of the fallouts of data we've talked about earlier. You can see, and again note, this is official data from the MBS, signed off by the minister. This is from the Health and Nutrition Report. And you can see the levels of malnutrition and stunting. Sokoto, Zamfara, Katsina, Jigawa, all those states where it's above 50%. We know what happens. Cognitive ability of kids, intellectual ability, ability to learn, stunted growth. The states become more fragile, more unstable. If you look at it by zones, then you can see the bigger picture. Northwest 50%, malnutrition, stunting and wasting. Northeast 42%, North Central 29%. Southwest, people like to think that this doesn't happen in the Southwest, but it does. Remember, 20% in the Southwest. If you break it down into a state like Lagos, which is 20 million, in absolute numbers, it's lower by percentage, but in absolute numbers, it's often higher than in many of the states in the North. So, some historical data that we should note, just very quickly. What did we know a decade ago? Before, or just before a decade ago, the rise of Boko Haram. If you look at, and I hope you can see the old map properly, because then we didn't really have sophisticated infographics. I hope it's not too dark. What did we know from the MBS? The percentage of males that didn't have access to education over a decade ago: Northwest 48%, Northeast, I can't see that very clearly now, but roughly the same figures. Now, why is this important? It's important because if you look at where we break down the figures, you will see that in terms of percentage and absolute numbers, what did we know 10 or more years ago? We could see in Borno and Yobe, 83% and 63% of males had no access to education. Look at the estimated male population then, 1.4 million in Yobe, 2.5 million in Borno. Look at the states at the top, Zamfara, Katsina, and so forth like that. 57%, 59%, 54%, 55% of males didn't have access to education at the time. This could have told us where the country was going at the time. Data could have pointed it out to us. It's really important because people think these things just happen. It doesn't just happen. By the way, if you look across ECOWAS and the Sahel, this is similar data in Mali, in Burkina Faso, parts of Niger Republic, parts of Chad. All those unstable countries. Now, why did the Northeast blow up before the Northwest? If you look at this satellite image of Lake Chad, you can see how it shrunk between 1963 and 2007. What could we have anticipated at that time? We could have anticipated that millions of people were going to lose their livelihood, farming, fishing, and so forth, that unemployment would grow. The state governments didn't understand this and retool themselves to invest in education, in job skills, in rural development. And once this sets in, we have the problem that we have now. Some quick takeaways. I said earlier, there is no military solution to underdevelopment. No army has ever defeated underdevelopment. Subnational governance is key to stability. Subnational media coverage and reporting will improve accountability. Some data we should all be familiar with to help us understand. The percentage of the population in Nigeria under 15 is 43%. 43% of Nigerian population is under 15. The median age is 18. It tells you that we have to make a lot of investment in youth education, youth job, youth skills. Without that, it's going to be a lot of problems. Population under 15 is 89 million. Population 15 to 24, 19%. Roughly 39 million. Unless we pay attention to these numbers and prepare accordingly, then things are going to get worse. So the 20 million children out of school, how did we get to this? Before the UNESCO Institute of Statistics released the new estimates last month, it was relatively easy to project if you understand the numbers. Roughly 7.5 million children born in Nigeria annually. Primary school enrollment, 5 million. Senior WAEC, that's at the age of 16 or 17 or so, 1.6 million. So, 2.5 million don't start school at all. Don't start at all every year. Roughly 6 million don't complete primary and secondary school. At the time we did this, the out-of-school children was 13 million. Now it's 20 million. The adults unable to read or write in Nigeria, 60 million. 60 million. This is from the Federal Ministry of Education. Now, if you want to solve this problem, the 20 million children out of school, UNESCO recommendations for class size 20-25 kids per class. That's about 800,000 classrooms and teachers that we need. 800,000 classrooms and teachers, far cheaper than Tucano airplanes, helicopter gunships, or as one politician suggested, they are marching in his honor today, that Nigeria needs to recruit 50 million youth, he said, 50 million youth into the army to go and fight in Sambisa. How did he come up with that? China doesn't have 50 million people in their army. India doesn't have. The 10 countries in the world with the biggest armies combined don't have 50 million in their armies. But some politicians think big armies are the solution. Unemployment is 33%. Youth unemployment is 42%. Roughly 100 million in multidimensional poverty. That's from the UNDP. When they speak, they will explain the Human Development Index. So, all this data on human development won't help itself. There are key issues to deal with, like electricity. Nigeria is at 5,000 megawatts of electricity. The global standard for sustainable development is 1,000 megawatts per 1 million people. We should be at 200,000 megawatts. We're at 5,000. When the grid collapses, we're at 0. There is no industrialization without electricity. So all the human development in the world will come to nothing if it is not enabled. And that's why that data in Qatar, where the World Cup is going to start on November 20th, it's 2.9 million people, same population as some of the local governments in Lagos. They have 10,000 megawatts. They are going to play in air-conditioned stadiums. 10,000 megawatts for 2.9 million people. So, I hope the scene setting can help us understand why population data is really crucial. There's going to be a census in 2023. The UNFPA, our keynote speaker, is the biggest technical supporter of population and census data in the world. Our keynote speaker is going to explain what that process is and how that can help us understand better how we can end underdevelopment in Nigeria. Thank you.